There are tens of thousands of gods all over the world, and many people claim to have seen and spoken to the gods. And so I want to know, is this something I should believe, something I should trust in?
The Torah is very specific about what it predicts, that everyone would know, not DNA and the distance of the moon to the earth, which no one would have had access to. What a worthless piece of information that would have been to my great-great-grandparents who knew nothing about that, had no way to measure that.
I am an atheist, by which I mean I believe that all of the evidence and things we see are best explained by a naturalistic universe. Could you tell me some of the reasons you believe that there are for belief that there is a God?
Judaism is a story not just about our faith, but it's about my people. I'm a Kohen. My great-great-grandfather is Aaron, the brother of Moses. So we've had a very long history, and throughout that history, God interacted in a very unique way with the children of Israel. And that possibly explains why the vast majority of the world, they may not be crazy about us, but they think that our central core document, the Torah, is a holy book. The revelation at Mount Sinai, which is the formidable event in Jewish history, was not God speaking to somebody personally or an angel appearing to somebody upstate New York or 8 people, but rather an entire nation experienced the revelation. We didn't have to trust anyone. Moreover, the events leading up to the revelation at Mount Sinai were part of Jewish history. It was my people that endured slavery in Egypt. It was my people that witnessed together as a nation miracles on a national scale and experienced the Exodus. And it is that national experience that's completely unique in the world. And the Torah itself makes this a point. In chapter 4 of Deuteronomy, the Torah tells us that, in fact, think back. It asks you, the reader, to all times that have gone past from one end of the world to the other. Has any other nation had such a national revelation? Has any other people even claimed such a thing? And the author of this book says that no other nation will ever make such a claim. It's completely unique in history. Search from one end of the world to the other. Has any other nation ever heard the voice of God as you have and lived? So it is based on that national experience through a wilderness, coming to the land of Israel. So all of Judaism is not just sort of a belief, like you might wonder, should I believe in any religion out there? It's a part of our national consciousness. It is passed down from father to son. So the Torah could very easily say to you that if anyone comes to you and says you should believe in any gods that your fathers did not know, do not listen to that person. And it can make that claim. No other holy book can do that because it's speaking to a nation of witnesses, Isaiah 43, verse 10. And therefore, the children of Israel called on to be a light to the world. We are told in this holy book about the events that will happen. Highly falsifiable claims are expressed in the Hebrew Bible. And here we are today, returned to Jerusalem. The miracles of our history are there for the world to see. Judaism, our faith, is a part of our national reservoir, our national consciousness, our national experience. And that's the foundation of our faith.
You mentioned that there was a claim that only Judaism made, that no other nation heard God or something along those lines. What do you mean by that? Because I think there are many nations who have claimed to have seen visions of gods. I mean, the most recent I've heard of was Christopher Columbus, when he came to Americas, asked the Native Americans to give him tributes and plants and things. And he said, if you don't do this, in 2 weeks' time, the moon will turn blood red and disappear. And that's my God is just so much more powerful than your gods. It's doing this. We know that wasn't because of God. He just knew the science behind the eclipse. But from the American Indians' perspective, they definitely thought they had a sign from God, and that it spoke to them as an entire people in that one instance. So why would that be any difference?
That's one of the ways we know that Christopher Columbus was trying to be polite here, was a really nasty fellow, because he knew very well what was going to happen in the celestial bodies, and he exploited the Native American Indians to get the result that he wished. But one thing, Christopher Columbus, we could say that the person was a bastard, and he was, but we cannot say he was stupid. So this is what Christopher Columbus would not say to them and didn't say to them. You should know that this will never happen again. Because he knew that if he could do it, somebody else down the pike can do it. It's not just a national revelation. It's hearing the voice of God. It's not just pointing to a celestial phenomena, which people can do, but it's literally hearing Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Hotzeisecha Me'eretz Yisrael mibeis avodim. I am the Lord your God who took you out of bondage, out of Egypt, to freedom. Lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim al panai. Shall have no other gods upon my face. We hear the words of God, and our nation was transformed. We have devoted our lives to Hashem because of an intimate connection. So it's not like kind of a magic trick, or, as you said, knowing, some celestial phenomena, some eclipse that was going to occur, and then exploit that. But it's hearing the voice of God. Moreover, when the children of Israel came to Mount Sinai, they had left Egypt 7 weeks earlier. They've passed through the sea that had parted for them. So there were miraculous experiences for the entire nation that they had endured in their hope for freedom. And it's that basis that all of Judaism is founded on, and everything else we believe in is based on, number one, that God revealed to himself to us at Mount Sinai. And I think one other thing should be said, Tom. Banks make a lot of money. It's very evident, not that I check their books, but when you walk the streets of New York, LA, San Francisco, London, banks have huge buildings, very valuable real estate. They're making a lot of money, loaning money, right? If you can get, I don't know what the interest rate is, but if you can get the interest rate that banks can get, you'd be able to build buildings like that as well. But before a bank loans you anything, as much as they want to, they will ask you for your Social Security number. And then they're going to check your credit rating, right? And they want to make sure that you've paid the debts that you have made, the financial promises that you have made in the past. And based on that, they will then trust you, in a sense have faith, but a highly informed type of faith, that if Tom has paid all his credit card debts in the past, paid his car loans in the past, then we can trust you in the future. So there is another caveat to all of this. The God of Israel, he's made promises to us. And you'll notice something about the Jewish Bible. There isn't a lot of talk about heaven and hell that you find all over the Christian Bible, right? There's almost no mention of the afterlife in the entire corpus of the Jewish scriptures. Why? Because it's unfalsifiable. You can't test it, right? You can't. The Christian Bible says you're going to burn in an eternal lake of fire constantly. You're going to go to hell if you don't believe. And Christians frequently tell co-religionists that if you don't maintain this belief, you're going to burn in hell. But you never hear Jews talk that way. Why? And it does work. It's a very successful method of scaring people because people are frightened about what happens after you die. But you can't test it. So if you were God, Tom, and you were writing a holy book and you wanted to convince people to commit to it, and you're really God, which means that you really can control the weather. If you're God, that'll be a minor miracle. If you're God, you really can control history. So here's what you would say if you're God. If you're God, you'd say, look, it's just going to stop raining, right? You're going to go into exile. How many years? 7 years. But I'm going to bring you back, Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10. You're going to be exiled from the land, Leviticus chapter 26, Deuteronomy 28, but I will bring you back. It'll be many days, but one day you will come home. So God has this enormous amount of credibility with the children of Israel, and the miracle of the return of the nation to their land after thousands of years, an unprecedented event in history. What you've just heard encapsulates why the Jewish people are so committed, connected, attached to God in love and devotion and loyalty.
Well, first thing I'd say is if I was God and I was writing a book, I'd probably write something more similar to what was written in the Hindu text, where they said the age of the earth is 4.3 billion years old. I think giving a number of facts that correspond to reality that there's no way they could have known at the time would be very good evidence. In the case of prophecies, it seems like the prophecies, if they were very precise and accurate, like the Hindu prediction of the age of the earth, that would be good evidence. I would agree with you. But it seems like the vast majority of them are very vague and can be interpreted in a number of different ways. And I did want to ask if Moses didn't exist, if he's a mythical figure, would that disprove Judaism?
Yes, completely. Just one point, because I don't want to move away from that little caveat. I think if for a moment that the Torah will just contain scientific information that only now we know about in the last few decades, imagine what that would mean. That would mean that for all of history, human history, no one would be able to test it out. The beauty of what is conveyed in the Torah is right now you can know that it stopped raining. Right now you can know that you'll be exiled. Right now you should know that the Assyrian Empire will penetrate Jerusalem, or I'll protect Jerusalem. The Torah has an immediacy. The Torah is telling you that certain acts is a cancer for you. It is of no use to the smoker to be told about a phenomena that he would only discover long after he's dead. So the Torah is written so that people immediately at any point in history, Torah is not reserved for high IQ people and scholars, that any child can understand the message and who is behind the message, and that goes to the national revelation as well.
Oh, yeah, I think that I wouldn't just give one prediction for hundreds of thousands of years in the future. That wouldn't be very useful. I would probably give predictions about things very recently in the past, present, and future, and so that there would be a consistent reification of the fact that this was a reliable text. So every new big discovery would be predicted in the Bible. So you will discover DNA as a double helix. You will discover germs cause disease. You will discover that the moon is 255,000 miles away. And so there'd be an incremental set of confirming predictions that you could verify, and they'd be very, very precise. The precision thing is what's important. To me, the prophecies in the Bible seem more like you will see a dog. It's like, well, yes, that's a very accurate statement. Like I will definitely see a dog eventually, but it's so common that happens. It's not a very precise or spectacular prediction. It's a pretty common thing you're going to expect. Wars happen all the time. So predicting a war is going to happen is pretty commonplace, especially during that time period. So I would need something very precise for the prediction to be a confirmation of the text, and it'd have to be consistently correct, consistently concise, and very, very specific, because the specificity is really important in predictions, because if you can interpret a prediction in 1,000 ways, that's the same as making 1,000 prediction, 999 of which are wrong. And so it's when I read the prophecies of the Torah, they seem very vague. They seem like you can interpret them in a number of different ways. Versus if I read the text of the Hinduism that says the earth is 4.3 billion years old, because it gives a number, it just gives a set number of years. That's very precise. And I think that is a more accurate way to write if you were the creator of the universe.
Imagine for a moment, Tom, that you and I can travel in a time machine and go back 3,300 years ago, which is when the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. And imagine we would have a statement made about DNA without the equipment to verify it. That would be the worst idea, because, of course, for us, with hindsight and all the leaps in science, for us it would be very beneficial. but for them, they would be lost. And Hashem cares deeply about every generation. Therefore, the revelation at that time was a national revelation. We really heard the voice of God. We were all there. You talk about DNA. Let's do that for a moment. I'm a Kohen. I'm a priest. There are nearly 1 million of us in the world. You can check, and this has been done, at the University of Arizona and around the world, my DNA. I mean, that's a highly falsified claim. There are Kohanim, priests all over the world. We very specifically, we are the patrilineal descendants of Aaron, the high priest, the brother of Moses. Okay? So what you could do is you can actually take my DNA and find a Jew who I don't know in Manchester, go to meet another Jew in San Francisco, another in Spain, who's a priest, and test our DNA and ask the question, is there a common marker on our Y chromosome? Well, so if the claim of my people bears any resemblance to truth, if it maps onto truth, what we would expect to find is that, in fact, we have that marker, and we do. There's a tribe in Africa, Lumba tribe, black men and women who look nothing like me. They have a tradition that they're not just Jewish, but they're the descendants of Aaron, priestly people. You can read all about them. The science has been done. We didn't know about them, but they had this claim for a very long time. We've tested their DNA. As you can imagine, what we'd expect to find, we discovered. They have that marker, the Y chromosome. So the beauty of Judaism is that it's something that could be tested at every stage of history. It's true, Tom, that many claims today we can look at will be very meaningful to us today, but have been meaningless to someone 3,000 years ago. And that's why when you ask, why is Judaism meaningful, I don't mean it's only meaningful in the year 2022, centuries after Galileo, but it was meaningful at every stage and turn of our rich history, and it will remain that way through our extraordinary destiny.
All right, I would agree that you wouldn't be able to write a holy book that only gives information that's relevant to one time period, but I think that you could write a holy book that had relevant information to every time period. And
Right.
you could have parts that people wouldn't understand at one time period, but they would come to understand in the future. And that would be fine. But I think that I would include those things because it seems like when we read the Bible today, it has no relevant information as far as I can tell. It doesn't tell us anything relevant about the world. Whereas if I was the creator of the universe, I would include things that would continue to be discovered throughout time. Artificial intelligence would be in there. Going to Mars would be in there. Those kinds of things we would expect to see confirmed. But I did want to ask about the genealogy thing because there's
About
Y
what?
genealogy, the Y chromosome markers you mentioned.
Sure.
There are Y chromosome markers in every culture. Every culture of people has Y chromosome markers. Famously, I think Attila the Hun has Y chromosome markers of his lineage that cover like a quarter of the planet and like 70% of Asia, which is quite phenomenal. Interesting, at least. But I don't think that indicates, for example, that you are in a lineage specifically of like Moses or something. I think the consensus of historians is that Moses was a mystical figure, I believe. And so I don't think
consensus where?
Of academic historians and archaeologists who research the time period and the events of going on in that time period.
I mean, we're talking about my uncle. I mean, when people say that Aaron didn't exist and mythological, they're saying that my family, it didn't exist. If we ask the vast majority of scholars of the Hebrew Bible, the overwhelming majority would say that Moses was a very important historical figure. The only thing is that it is true that in the secular academic world, it is true that you have a minimalist attitude, that they would come up with stuff like that. And I hope your viewers will recognize that that it is at least striking that every claim of our people, of our history, is denied by significant swaths of the world who have some interest. And I'm not blaming people. I'm just saying that going back to Moses, to Abraham, there are folks who said that the Temple Mount in the Western Wall, there was no Temple of Solomon that stood there. There are people in the world who have said that the history of our people that occurred during World War II never happened. So we're used to people questioning and doubting, but it's not a good thing. I would just say this to the viewer, that they should reconsider their approach of scholars, because it becomes a kind of, I'm not trying to be obnoxious, but it becomes a kind of North Korea thing. Because in the secular academic world, if you say, I believe that Moses existed and he was a lawgiver and heard the voice of God, if you even say, I'll actually lower the bar, if you actually say that the book of Daniel was written by Daniel, they'll throw you out. They'll look at you like you're crazy. And they don't have the training that Jewish scholars have. And they'll go, no, Daniel couldn't possibly have written Daniel because, after all, I mean, this is another conspiracy, that Daniel spoke about Antiochus Epiphanes, the king of the Seleucid Empire, the fourth. So, I mean, I hope that people are I don't know if I can convince you, but at least people should notice that there is a phenomena going on in the minimalist world to essentially cast doubt on almost every aspect of Jewish history until the recent. And I think that should give people pause. You can't prove that something didn't exist. You can prove something did exist. And if archaeology, you mentioned archaeology, so I'm just bringing it, if archaeology was a hard science, and it isn't, then you would have a much greater consensus among archaeologists. But in fact, we find that archaeologists have a certain worldview. And if they have a certain worldview, you and I could predict what they're going to say about discoveries, because archaeology is like having a 1,000-piece puzzle, having only 2 pieces and no picture to work with. So that's why we can predict what archaeologists will say based on their worldview. I think people should at least take pause in saying that we don't know. And as far as DNA goes, what we find among the Jewish people is consistent with the fantastic claims made in the Torah. We're an eternal nation that cannot be destroyed. I mean, here we are, not even a century after 1/3 of my people were murdered in Europe during World War II. Like, what nation endured that? And there are people today who say that that never happened. Well, we exaggerated that. So it is true there are certain circles that are minimalist circles. Maybe if Christians hadn't gone to war for 30 years during the 17th century, maybe the attitude towards religion might be different. I don't know. But our people are real, our history is real, and our destiny is something really very special and remarkable. We want the world to know about that.
Oh, I definitely agree. There are people out there who believe the craziest things. There are people who believe the world is flat. It's always an interesting position to take. But I think the reason professional academics, I don't think, have the same bias that you're talking about. I remember Sam Harris was referencing the archaeologists in Israel who are Jewish doing research to try and find confirmation archaeological evidence of the Exodus, and they couldn't find anything. They just found nothing. And if the number of people who were said to have moved from Egypt during that time period had transitioned, we would see archaeological evidence of new homesteads being built in that location at a very massive rate. But that's not what we see. We see them coming along from a long, protracted, slow period of time. And we don't see any pots or evidence of 40 years in the desert of this 500,000 at least people, 1/2 to 2 million people in the desert for 40 years. No archaeological evidence of that whatsoever. And if that population was so massive, it would have been about 1/3 of the entire population of Egypt at that time, if it was true. And there just wasn't enough food to even support that. There's so many facts that seem to contradict the scientific evidence we have about the time period that I think most scholars, including Jewish and Christian scholars, agree when looking at the archaeological and textual evidence that Moses probably didn't exist and was probably a story built upon to convey more figurative meaning to the people. And I think it's not just like they just don't believe because of bias. They're like flat earthers or Holocaust deniers who are just completely ideologically biased. But it seems like there's a lot of very good evidence that seemed to convince me that these stories were more about conveying meaning to the people and giving ideas, kind of like American Indian stories about how their gods interacted with the people at the time period. But I don't think those actually happened, or with how Thor interacted with people.
So this date that we happen to be having this conversation, Tom, marks the 15th anniversary of when Israel bombed and destroyed the Syrian nuclear reactor in an amazing raid. Going back to 2002, the Jewish state discovered that Syria was building a nuclear reactor with the help of North Korea. And for 5 years, the Jewish state gathered more and more evidence that it was because Syria tried to mask what they were doing, tried to use a plane building. They knew what Israel had done to the Osirak reactor years earlier. But Israel had gathered all the intelligence that they needed. That information was shared with the administration of your country. And then in the summer of 2007, Israel, it was less than 30 planes, dropped 22 tons of explosives on the building and destroyed it within a matter of minutes using a corridor going through Turkey, and then came back. And one of the things that's very striking is that Syria didn't say a word about it and still won't. Why? Because it was a defeat for them. They were embarrassed by it. I concede this point to you, that an empire such as Egypt would not have written about their defeat. In the past, nations did write about their history. Sometimes were really lucky because they, instead of putting it on papyrus or vellum, they actually chiseled it into a stone or a piece of metal, so it remains to this day. But they bragged about their successes and their conquests, not about their defeats. So, again, what we're asking the question is, what we encounter today, the information, what has been written, recorded, is that consistent with the Torah or not? When we look at the DNA of somebody like me, and I could predict that you can study the DNA of someone I've never met in my life who lives in Melbourne, Australia, I could predict that we have a Y chromosome that matches so closely that it can date when our common relative lived roughly 3,300 years ago. The Torah is not a medical book. It's not a science book. It's a book where God tells us about how we should live, what he wants from us, information that we would otherwise not have access to. And God tells us this is what would happen to you during your history. Take a look. No, I'm not going to talk to you about the resurrection of the dead. And it's true. I would not expect Syria in the recent past discussing its defeat, or ancient Egypt in the very far past talking about its defeat. So that's what we're looking for. But we are, I concede this point to you, that the nation of Israel, my people, my nation, we are walking witnesses. You are my witnesses. Witnesses to what? To the national experience and consciousness of our people, an unprecedented event in history where God revealed himself. Not said, look for a celestial sign in the sky. No, it's hearing the voice of God. It's not looking at the moon and looking at its color. No. It's passing on dry land through the sea. So that's our long history that we want to share with the world.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. I think that the history of the Jewish people is very profound and interesting, and as a culture is something that should absolutely be respected. But my only issue is when they claim to have this experience where God spoke to them. The first thing I want to ask, which I do for any question, is how do you differentiate reality from imagination, because humans are very imaginative. We make up all kinds of things. There are tens of thousands of gods all over the world, and many people claim to have seen and spoken to the gods. And so I want to know, is this something I should believe, something I should trust in?
When the Torah says that, one day I'm going to find you, I'm going to bring you home, you're going to be spread from one end of the world to the other. Nations will be impressed with your Torah, Deuteronomy chapter 4. All the nations will go, what a wise nation this is that has such a Torah. But you'll be spread from one end of the world to the other, and your wisdom will spread throughout the world. But you'll remain few in number, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 27. These are outrageous claims. But one day, after a very long exile, Hosea chapter 3, verse 4 and 5, I'm going to bring you home. Isaiah 43, I will find you. I will bring your sons from of the north and your daughters from the south. I will say to the furthest most islands, hold not back. I am bringing you home. And you're coming home to Jerusalem, and there you will be resurrected as a nation in the Holy Land. I will keep my promise, and I love you. Watch me. That's what the God of Israel is saying. He's saying, just watch me. Just watch what I'm doing in history. So instead of looking for a boneyard somewhere in a desert, we're a living testimony. And here we are. After thousands of years, we're tired, but we're rejuvenated by what? By a promise that God made to our people. And we're a living witness to the God of Israel, and we encourage the world to take notice of that. The Torah is very specific about what it predicts, that everyone would know, not DNA and the distance of the moon to the earth, which no one would have had access to. What a worthless piece of information that would have been to my great-great-grandparents who knew nothing about that, had no way to measure that. What a more valuable way to convey and say, I'm with you. I'm with you at every step of the way. If you turn away from me, you're going to have at every stage highly predictable, highly falsifiable events that will occur, and even the worst events. Jacob's trouble in Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 7. The worst event in history will happen to you. Umimeno yivoshea, but from it will come your deliverance to the land of Israel. These are really, really amazing things. And the children of Israel, I would submit, are remarkable people. Not I'm saying that as bragging, heaven forbid. I frequently don't feel that I don't say it's too strong that I don't deserve, but I feel humbled by the history of my nation. And yes, there'll be people who will claim that our history never occurred, but we're going to keep reaching out to share that light, not by believe in me and be saved, but look at us, keep your eye on the ball, watch the promise.
Adon olam, asher malach, בטרם כל יציר נברא, לעת נעשה